and thus sitting upon a bed in the hospital of Santa Maria Nuovo in Firenze, without any untoward movement or sign, he passed from this life. And I made an anatomy to see the cause of a death so sweet, which I found to proceed from debility through lack of blood and deficiency of the artery which nourishes the heart and other lower members. I found this artery, and he's referring to the aorta, very desiccated, shrunken, and withered. Leonardo da Vinci, who conducted a number of dissections and made anatomical drawings and didn't have a dissector and sure as heck didn't have a text. Yet he got it all right. It's a brilliant diagram. It's essentially correct. The problem is there's only one student in this class who could read the notes, and that would be Saria. Because you see, Saria speaks Italian. Now this is Renaissance Italian. The problem is Saria would have to take it into the woman's room and look at it in the mirror, because you see, Leonardo was very worried about people stealing his discoveries and wrote backwards. So you'd shine it in the mirror, you could read it, and Saria, you would find out that it's absolutely correct. The problem is this diagram is very scary. It's probably what you think when you open your anatomy text things look like for the first time, looking at the brachial plexus and the organization of the limbs. If this is the case, and you'll certainly be doing that before Friday, then this lecture is for you, because what I'm going to try to do this afternoon is give you some organizing principles relating to the structure of the extremities and their function. And just like as in the case of the first day, when Lee Gehrke unloaded on you the complete nervous system, peripheral nervous system, in both its somatic and visceral and sensory components, and your back staggered against your chair, you'll never make it through this course. Hearing it all in one plan is helpful. So also I hope hearing it all in one plan about the extremities will be helpful, although it is a large load. Yet there's some very simple principles that we can articulate right off the bat. There's a great similarity between the upper extremity and the lower extremities. An arm is not a leg, but when I get through with you this afternoon, you're going to see that there is considerable comparability between them. Osteologically, in terms of muscle topography, and in terms of neuromuscular organization. Let's start with osteology, the bones. Both in the shoulder girdle above and the pelvic girdle below, there are 3 bones. There's a, you just listen to me and watch me. I mean, this is a recitation. You'll take notes soon enough. There is a clavicle here and a scapula behind, and a little process right here called the coracoid. It means beak-like. And phylogenetically, the coracoid is a separate bone. Corwin Sullivan knows this and loves it. However, in most mammals, all mammals now extant, it's fused to the scapula. Below, there is an ilium above, a pubis in front, and an ischium on which you are sitting. Tripartite limb girdles. Proximally, there is a humerus, a single element here, and proximally a femur down here. They both articulate with a ball and socket joint. The ball being the proximal head, the socket being the glenoid or the hip joint or acetabulum. More distally, there are double elements, a radius on your thumb side and an ulna. Down here, there is a tibia on the big toe side, and outside a little slender fibula. This is essentially a hinge joint here. It's a hinge joint here, but it admits special movements of this kind, which I'll talk about in a minute. More distally, there are a bunch of little bones or ossicles. In the case of the wrist, they're called carpals. In the case of the foot, they're called tarsals. And they admit special movements. Beyond that, there are rays or digits. beyond the carpals, metacarpals, these long bones here, and down here, metatarsals. And then the phalanges themselves, these little jointed structures. And we enjoy with other primitive mammals, the primitive mammalian phalangeal count, which is 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. That is to say, on our pollex, thumb, and hallux, big toe, we have 2 phalanges. On all the other digits, digits 2 through 5, we have 3 phalanges. So how you doing? Nice to see you. Yeah, they're never, they're never on time at Johns Hopkins, ever. But we didn't cover anything important. So, he got his flag, that's good. Can't find a flag to buy. So that's the osteology. Now, there are, in addition to that, major similarities in the orientation and placement of muscle groups, And to introduce that subject, I really should show you this slide. It's very important. You've probably seen it already before, because you open your textbook and there these people are. There they are, and you go, this is going to be a really weird course. By now you know that to get anatomical, yes, get naked, that's fine, but why are they, why are they standing there in a position of supplication? Why? It's actually not a position of supplication, it's a position of supination. And why is supination in the upper extremity the anatomical position favored by anatomists across the world? That takes some explaining. And it turns out that this position in supination aligns muscle groups of similar innervation and that were phylogenetically and ontogenetically derived together. In fact, both extremities are rather similar in this regard. And in order to really understand this, we have to go back and give you a short glimpse at some comparative anatomy and with a phylogenetic perspective. I realize that most of you have not come to Harvard Medical School to get a course in comparative anatomy. You're paying much too much money, you expect much more. But in this case, it's very necessary to get a grasp of, in fact, how the extremities are put together. I'm going to insult one student here mercilessly. She will be thoroughly cheesed off at me by the end of the lecture because she knows something about the first subject, and she's Suzanne Cote, who spent her not inconsiderable amount of time at Montreal, at McGill, working on a fish called Eusthenopteron. Eusthenopteron is, among other fishes, a sarcopterygian, closely related to those fishes which gave rise to animals with limbs, in the Devonian, way back, 400 million years ago. She knows something about this, and she doesn't like my drawing. Right off the bat, I know she's going to be all over me. But if you go back to the most sort of primitive pre-tetrapod ancestors, and you look at their limbs and you look at subsequent limbs, you can recognize some very simple things about it. First of all, they've got, it's a paddle-like thing sticking out. They've got a border which we can call preaxial, and let's color that green. Preaxial, because it's in front of the axis of the limb and it's toward the head. Yeah. Smoke those pencils. Out comes the color. And there are the colors. Similarly, the posterior border or margin of the limb can be recognized as having a postaxial border. These two borders, pre and postaxial, separate two surfaces. One is dorsal, toward the back of the animal. The other is ventral, toward the stomach, the bottom side of the animal. On this dorsal surface are extensor muscles. So let's fill that in with blue. These are all extensor muscles. And on the surface that you cannot see in this simplistic diagram, but on the ventral aspect here, underneath, would be flexor muscles and a flexor surface. This would be ho-hum academic of interest only to hard-headed paleontologists like myself, were it not for the fact that these two borders and surfaces persist on us today. For example, a preaxial border on me looks like this. There's a preaxial border. And on this side, there's my preaxial border. And then if I put a postaxial border there, there's post, and here's post right here, that. And these two surfaces then define a surface of flexor muscle group and flexor muscle innervation like this. My wife actually thinks this is a very kinky lecture. She's coming down from New Hampshire tonight just to see me. You know, when you get my age, you'll do anything. Yeah, that's the way it is. And here is the dorsal extensor surface here. All right, that's all extensor surface. And these are all dorsal muscles, like this. There it is. All right. Now, what has happened, however, in the course of, I mean, it looks kind of complicated to you because of my arms swinging and dangling around. In course of postural and locomotor evolution, things have shifted between these two simple extremities. Let's look at it with respect to the forelimb, our upper extremity. Why these animals are blown apart is the two extremities have slightly different phylogenetic and ontogenetic trajectories, and I'll explain that. But fundamentally what happened is when you get the first tetrapods, you begin to actually use the limb for support, and you flex here at the elbow and extend here at the wrist from this flat paddle. Nonetheless, you can appreciate that the preaxial border here is still preaxial, fine. Postaxial border is still postaxial, no prob. Extensor muscles are dorsal, flexor muscles are ventral. However, running around like this in this position has got your thumb stuck forward, among other things, and animals quickly modified this limb posture such that they began to tuck in the elbow and point the forefoot, known to us as the hand, forward. Now you can see what this effect had. As soon as they did that, the preaxial border here suddenly got twisted. Suddenly was twisted. And this tucking in of the elbow, which isn't very apparent in most reptiles, becomes extremely apparent in mammals that tuck the elbow all the way in, so that you have a preaxial border in a mammal that looks like this. It actually spirals. And the postaxial border, which is over here, and spirals around to that position. We are essentially running around with a relatively unmodified mammalian limb posture in the forelimb. Look at it this way. If I start out here, you can imagine, there I am, Devonian fish, you'll love it. Preaxial is forward, dorsal is up. Here I am, early tetrapod. Decide that having the thumbs forward is a bad idea. Put the hand forward, tuck the elbow in, and then become a mammal and do this, and then stand there as an anatomist, and you're still there. You get anatomical, you get supinated, you go back to the primitive position. And therefore, you line up all the flexors and you line up all the extensors. And so that's why the position of supination, you see, is the anatomical position. Because pronation, which we normally carry about with us, is essentially that of a mammal and has this enormous twist. Whereas the preaxial border is untwisted when you supinate. Good. That'd be kind of a boring story in itself. Don't get very far. But it turns out that the brachial plexus organizes itself just along these lines. And this then begins to get complicated. Go to the brachial plexus drawing. This horrible-looking, wormy mess actually makes some sense along the following lines. First, recognize that the brachial plexus is formed at its roots by the ventral rami of the 5th cervical, 6th, 7th, the 8th and last cervical spinal nerve, and the 1st thoracic. In those cases where there is an additional contribution to the brachial plexus, it will be, in most cases, from C4, and that is called prefixed. Only about a third variations occur from T2, and naturally that would be called postfixed, but those are simple variations. Okay? So there are the ventral rami of spinal nerve C5, 6, 7, 8, T1. And the next thing that happens is that the upper two join, the lower two join, and we end up with 3 trunks. So these are the roots. Here are the trunks. That's already on your notes. And here is the upper trunk, the middle trunk, and the lower trunk. The next stage in this decussation is the most critical, because here we are forming anterior and posterior divisions. These trunks are dividing anteriorly and posteriorly. And they're going to do so anteriorly and posteriorly with respect to this, the axillary artery. There's a segment of the axillary artery, and that's your guidepost in this area. So, anatomical position. These nerves are going to split anteriorly and anterior divisions are going to serve anterior or flexor muscle groups. So here is the anterior division of the upper trunk. Here is the anterior division of the middle trunk. And here is the anterior division of the lower trunk. Posteriorly, these divisions run behind the axillary artery. So here is the posterior division of the upper trunk, posterior division of the middle and lower trunks, and these will combine in one major structure like this, which I'm showing in dashed lines and in blue because it is posterior. It's lying behind the axillary artery. So that's the anterior and posterior divisions. What we have now then are three major structures lying in relation to the axillary artery, and these are the so-called cords of the brachial plexus. And you can believe that if this is a right shoulder viewed anteriorly, that this would be the LC, the lateral cord. This would be the MC, the medial cord, and PC back here, the posterior cord. So you end up with three cords. And from these three cords come all the major peripheral nerves serving this upper extremity, with a few exceptions that are more proximal. Suzanne, you're looking very quizzical. You didn't like the fish, and you don't like this either. Medial cord is in here. Okay? Yeah. The lateral and medial cords, which receive contributions from the anterior divisions, are now going to form nerves that serve flexor muscle groups. These major nerves are, one, the musculocutaneous. This is a recitation of names, ladies and gentlemen. I know this. This is hard, but you got to start somewhere. Might as well start with me. But you'll see this soon enough. The musculocutaneous nerve is muscular here in the arm and cutaneous, sensory, in the forearm. The musculocutaneous nerve serves the major flexors of the forearm, of the arm, which you're looking at here in me. That would be the biceps brachii, the brachialis, the coracobrachialis. I've written them down just in case you don't know how to spell them as you listen to me. All right, the major flexors here. A contribution from the lateral and medial cords makes the median nerve. The median nerve, which lies in a median position in the arm. Now, the median nerve serves the following flexors. Almost all of the intrinsic muscles in the forearm that are pertain to the flexor group. Okay? Almost all of them. And almost all of the intrinsic muscles of the thumb. Okay? So the median nerve is mostly a thumb and forearm flexor muscle, nerve. Finally, the medial cord continues as the ulnar nerve, and this ulnar nerve is the primary nerve of the hand. The intrinsic muscles within the hand are mostly served by the ulnar nerve, with the exception, of course, of those in the thumb that belong to the median. Just giving you general principles now. The ulnar nerve also serves the flexor carpi ulnaris and 1/2 of the flexor digitorum profundus, the deep digital flexors on the ulnar side. There are branches here and here of the lateral and medial cords, respectively. And these are the LP, lateral pectoral, and MP, medial pectoral. Both of these nerves, which you have already seen and which tend to have interconnections, both serve the pectoralis minor and major. So those are your two pectoral nerves, and now you understand why they are named lateral pectoral. It's confused you on the first day because the lateral pectoral ends up on the chest being medial to the medial pectoral. And that was ugly, dirty trick. But it's because they're named for their origin from the lateral and medial cords of the brachial plexus, respectively. Very good. Let's look at extensor nerves now. From C5, you have a dorsal scapular, which will supply the, I didn't put it up here, the rhomboids. And likewise, you have the suprascapular nerve here, which is an extensor nerve, which is going to supply the supra and infraspinatus, supraspinatus and infraspinatus. Now, recall the posterior divisions of the upper, middle, and lower trunk. They all run posterior to the axillary artery. They run together as a massive cord. That is the posterior cord. And the distal terminus of the posterior cord yields two nerves. One is smaller than the other. And is the axillary. The axillary nerve innervates the deltoid and teres minor. The major terminus of that posterior cord is the radial nerve, and that radial nerve takes care of all the rest, everything that is dorsal, everything that is extensor, distally down the arm. In other words, all extensors of the elbow, the wrist, the digits, are innervated by the radial nerve. So you got two major extensor nerves. You have an axillary nerve, which is taking care of teres minor and deltoid, and the radial does the triceps and everything else in terms of extension. These two branches, the medial brachial and medial antebrachial cutaneous, are just sensory. They're not motor, just put sensory down for these. And finally, there's one major nerve, the long thoracic, which rises proximally, and that is for the serratus anterior. There are three branches that occur or come off from about this position here, from the posterior cord, and we will mark them 1, 2, 3. The first one is the so-called upper subscapular. You got a little box there. Note that, upper subscapular, which serves the subscapularis. There it is, written there, subscapularis. The next one is the thoracodorsal. And what's thoracic and what's dorsal? Back here, well, that's the latissimus. So it serves the latissimus dorsi, the broadest muscle of the back. That's what that means. Finally, you have a lower subscapular nerve, 3, a little branch, which will serve, again, the subscapularis and the teres major. Blizzard of detail, a horror show to be sure, but wait, it'll take the next 2 weeks to learn this and see it. What I want you to learn today is that the brachial plexus makes sense in terms of anterior-posterior divisions, dividing into a lateral and medial cord, which ultimately give rise to the 3 major nerves, musculocutaneous, median, and ulnar, which are serving this side of the upper extremity. These are all flexors. This is flexion, that's flexion, that's flexion. Whereas the posterior cord is serving muscles that are extensors. That's extension, that's extension, that's extension, that's extension. All right? So flexors, extensors, that's how the brachial plexus is organized. As you would imagine, there are certain injuries which are very distinctive that occur, resulting in syndromes or palsies. One is typically an upper brachial plexus palsy. It carries the eponym of a German internist, Wilhelm Heinrich Erb, who died in 1921, and a famous French physiologist, anatomist, student of medicine, Benjamin Guillaume Armand Duchenne, who was born in 1806, died 1875. This is often referred to as an Erb Duchenne or an Erb's palsy. It involves avulsion, pulling out of roots 5 and 6. How does that happen? It's easy. Buy a Harley Davidson. It's no problem. You get on these cycles, you're ripping down the road, you hit that oily patch, off you come. You go to the curbside, and your shoulder hangs up on the curb and is massively depressed. Okay? Head separates this way, shoulder goes down, C5, C6 come out. Okay? Individuals with an Erb Duchenne, say I did it to my right side, will present themselves like this. Here's what I look like normally. Arms a little abducted. Normal posture of the limb, a little bit of flexion of the elbow. And I got this. Okay? What's involved here are a number of functional deficits, 3 of the most important of which involve these muscles. One, the deltoid. The deltoid is an extensor muscle. It is supplied by the axillary nerve. It contains almost exclusively C5-6. So you take out C5-6, you're going to take out the axillary nerve, you're going to take out the deltoid. And what is the function of the deltoid? Well, we've seen the deltoid do this. We've also seen the deltoid abduct. And so these people don't have a deltoid. That arm is hanging straight down. My generous deltoid keeps my arm cocked, this arm cocked out a little bit, right? I have no snickle. No deltoid, you're going to hang straight down. So that is, you're going to have much reduced what we would call abduction, abduction. It's the first time you've probably heard that word. Wow, you haven't heard, you've heard of abduct. Latin, ab, from, duco, I lead from. This is abduction. This is adduction, adduction. So reduced abduction. The arm hangs really straight down in these people, these ex-motorcycle riders. Instead of having this nice little crook here, it's just flat out. Well, you see the muscles here. That's the biceps and brachialis, the major flexors of the arm. So you've lost elbow flexion. Flexion, put elbow. Why? Go back over here. The musculocutaneous nerve, which is innervating the biceps brachii, the brachialis and coracobrachialis, is 5, 6, and 7. Major contributions of 5 and 6, so that's much weakened. You're hanging straight down. Finally, this is a little hard for you to understand, you haven't seen it, the arm is rotated medially. The arm is rotated medially like that. A major lateral rotator of the arm is a muscle that comes from this fossa. There is the spine. It's below the spine. It's the infraspinatus muscle. That muscle crosses over the capsule of the joint, inserts on the greater tuberosity here, and is quite capable of turning the arm out. That's in supination. That's what happens when I do that. It is one of the major lateral rotators. Without it, a number of medial rotators, unopposed, take over. What are they? Medial rotator, massive pectoralis. Medial rotator, handsome-looking latissimus dorsi. All these are medial rotators. So is the teres major. So well developed in many of you. So what you have, no lateral rotator, the medial rotators turn the hand in. And it's often called I don't know what you would call it. It's a cartoon name, but it's used sometimes. It's called waiter's tip. Shows waiter's tip. The arms hang straight down and just turn the thing around like that. Okay? So you're going to show with no or reduced lateral rotation, the medial rotators take over. What you can do with the upper brachial plexus, you can sure do with the lower brachial plexus at C8 and T1. How do you do that? Well, you can fall a great distance and attempt to break yourself on the way down by grabbing something, or actually fall over something, a tree branch. If you start from the top of the tree and you finally hang up on your armpit, coming down, and now you're at speed, and up you go like that. It has even been known to occur with inappropriate and excessive traction during birth. Pull and avulse T1, possibly even C8. Now, T1 and C8 are the major components in a very important nerve here, the ulnar nerve. And it's the intrinsic muscles of the hand, minus those of the thumb, that are served by the ulnar nerve. And many of these intrinsic muscles provide for these delicate movements of the digits that you use in everyday manipulative activities. Without those muscles, the hand is in imbalance. Very much the case of the infraspinatus versus the pectorals, lat dorsi, and teres major. The hand is in balance, and the extensors begin to take over, like so. And then there is traction here on the flexor tendons. And what happens is these individuals end up with a clawed hand. That's a clad, and you've seen clawed hands, people sitting in wheelchairs with a hand like that. And that shows the lack, the failure of innervation, failure of normal muscle activity, of intrinsics. You'll understand that better when we get to the hand. So those are the brachial plexus syndromes, palsies. Oh, incidentally, this, sorry, I forgot this. This is sometimes referred to as Klumpke's palsy, named after a Parisian neurologist, Madame Klumpke Desjardins, died in 1921, was born 1859. Klumpke's palsy, lower brachial plexus palsy, involving C8 and T1. We are, nonetheless, with all this complexity, metameric, segmented animals. We've seen that segmentation in the ribs. We've seen it in the vertebrae. Metamerism is simply serial repetition of the same or comparable structures. All right, you've seen that. That kind of stripedness occurs in the dermatomes you already recognize, but it gets a little strange when you get to the extremities. And perhaps it's worthwhile considering the following scenario. During early development, it is undoubtedly the case that within the first month, in the appearance of the limb bud, you have a perfectly well-ordered metameric pattern of superficial sensory innervation across the area of the limb bud from about C4 to T2. Fine, but limbs grow extremely rapidly. They first appear as little tiny little fins, and then grow out into paddles, and then they really start to grow. It's heuristic, it's ad hoc, it's a Kipling story, but what appears to have happened is that this rapid outgrowth of the limb essentially carries the dermatomes of 6, 7, and 8 with it. Carries it so rapidly that 5 and T1, do you see, are left to be adjoining neighbors. So in an adult anterior or ventral view, in the beloved anatomical position, this is the dermatome pattern of the upper extremity. How can you remember it? If you can count, you're home safe. And I know all of you can count. Because you will count down the preaxial border and up the postaxial border, and you will go 4, right? 5, 6, 7, this is 8, T1, T2, my areola is T4, and down we go. All right? So it's a very easy to remember and is an important piece of diagnostic knowledge. On the posterior aspect of the extremity, the dermatomes are quite cleanly metameric. No comment need to be made about them. Good. Just count. Start at the shoulder, 4. 5 is biceps. Down here to the thumb, 6 shooter, 6. Shouldn't have said that. 7, 8, T1, T2. Although the hind limb, hind fin, lower extremity, may be modeled as looking similar to that of the forefin, forelimb, upper extremity. In fact, it has a rather different postural history. And it goes like this. Here, of course, would be the preaxial border. Here's the postaxial border. And just in the case of the forefin, here are the extensors. And underneath, obviously, flexors. The same thing happened, too, with respect to the bending. Early tetrapods must have soon learned to flex the knee and extend the ankle. So they're standing up here, right on a right-angled strut. However, unlike the anterior limb, in which the knee is tucked in and the hand or manus or foot pointed forward, here the knee begins to rotate in. The elbow is tucked backward. Here, obviously, the knee is being moved forward. And if you also rotate the foot forward, then you have a postaxial border, which is on a mammal, looks like that, and a preaxial border, which is over here and here and here. Do you see in a mammal there's considerable difference in the positioning of pre- and postaxial borders? Now, I can show you a preaxial border on my lower extremity. There's one thing I can't do, however, and I'll show you that in a minute. My preaxial border, in fact, coincides with my inseam. There's my preaxial border. The postaxial border coincides with my outer seam, like that. So, you see, if I attempted, however, so much change has happened. If I can get into the anatomical position with the upper, that's perfectly primitive. You know, I can go fish if I want. That's no problem. But the problem is getting this one back into the, because I've got to get this, all right? I've got to get that preaxial aligned with this, okay? So, you know, I have to come around, you know, this is very hard, like that. And I once actually split my pants doing it, to the myriad delight of the class. I'm very worried about doing it. But you can see it's very hard to do because so much postural rotation has taken place. But basically, the first tetrapods came out standing around like this, you know. Okay, and they just said, well, that's not good. So you put your feet forward and start to tuck your knees forward. And then you rotate them farther in like that until you're in a human, very parasagittal position. Fine. But there's the same distribution of extensor and flexor muscle groups. Look, if I have to get that all the way around, this is the extensor group. I've got to get this facing my back. It's hard. These are all extensor muscles, everything here. And they're all going to be served by extensor nerves. These back here are all flexor muscles, all served by flexor nerves. Let's go through that. Fortunately, the lumbosacral plexus is not a horror show like the brachial plexus. Let's make sense of it. The lumbosacral plexus originates from L2 through L5, second through fifth lumbar, spinal nerve segments, and the first three sacrals. And it divides thus: two pairs of nerves. One pair is preaxial and contains a flexor and an extensor nerve. The other pair is postaxial and contains a flexor and extensor nerve. In fact, I could draw them very simply here by doing a red line and a blue line and then I'm going to have to make it dotted because it's ventral, and another blue line here like that. That's all you have. But let me show you more realistically with regard to the human condition. The most preaxial of this pair of nerves arises from L2, L3, and L4. And from that trunk, we derive a flexor nerve to the adductor group. And that flexor nerve is the obturator nerve. Similarly, from L2, 3, and 4 arise a extensor nerve which serve the quads, these big muscles in the front of your thigh, and the sartorius. And this is known as the femoral nerve. Okay, so far it's real easy. Watch this now. Got one pair of nerves. One's going to serve the adductors right in here. That's the obturator. The femoral is going to take this, all the quads and the muscles on the anterior thigh. All you have left at the lower extremity in terms of major nerves is another pair. That pair has the following components. One of the components arises from L4, L5, S1, and S2. And it is an extensor nerve which we will bring down to the peroneal muscle group and the anterior tibial group ending on the top of the foot. Its flexor nerve counterpart not only has 4, 5, 1, and 2, but also has some S3 in it. Some S3, but that's fine, and we'll take it off here as the, oh, I didn't label this nerve, did I? Sorry, that's the peroneal nerve. And this nerve is the tibial nerve. And that is going to serve the hamstrings on the back of the leg, the posterior tibial group, gastrocnemius, soleus, and everything in your deep calf on the posterior side, and the intrinsic muscles of the foot. So it is that the human lower extremity has 4 major nerves. 2 of them are extensor nerves. The femoral nerve allows you to flex your hip here and extend the hip. It's nerves on the extensor surface. The peroneal nerve comes around here and allows you to extend your ankle and toes. All right, so these nerves, femoral and peroneal, have to do with this old extensor surface. The flexor nerves, obturator and tibial, respectively take care of the adductors right here, and tibial takes everything else. All the hamstrings back here, gastrocnemius, soleus, and the rest of it in there, and the muscles on the bottom of the foot, all tibial. There are 2 little nerves I'll mention right now. The superior gluteal is a 4, 5, S1 to the gluteus medius and minimus. And the inferior gluteal nerve is a 5, S1, S2, to that big muscle back here, the gluteus maximus. That's all there is, folks. You've heard it all. Of course, it's nearly killed you. Simple set of flexor and extensor nerves. Know that this is the extensor surface, which is rotated from way back there to way around here. You can always go flexion and extension. You always go primitive. You can always go anatomical with the upper extremity, but it's harder with the lower extremity. Finally, the dermatomes of the lower extremity, likewise, as in the upper extremity, have a pattern sui generis, a pattern that is all their own. And a little difficult to first understand unless you likewise posit, Anne-Marie. Five, 1, and 2, the lower, the inferior gluteal nerve. Medius and minimus, you go 4, 5, and S1. Okay? Yep. Here is this little limb bud of the lower extremity, the hind limb. And what apparently occurs ontogenetically is what I just mimicked out for you that has occurred phylogenetically. Namely, you start with the limbs out in this position, and then you migrate them around by twisting them and pulling them forward. And if you just conceive of that as a rotation about this, a transverse axis, as well as a rotation of this limb bud here about a vertical axis, which is basically what you have to do to get that limb around, then you can follow seriatim why it seems to be that the dermatomes on the human lower extremity seen in anterior aspects spiral. Because I've taken a limb that used to be like this, and I've brought it around like that. You can remember, if you please, the dermatomes of the lower extremity, because here at the inguinal ligament, right above your crotch, you can start counting, L1. And count off 2 more, L2, L3. When you get to the kneecap, that's L4. And L5 is spiraling here. And then S1 is going to be on the outside. But this spiraling, or does this, have any of you known anybody with lower back problems that gets spiraling referred pain? Ever heard of that? Amazing. What a young crowd. What healthy parents and families. That's great. We had a guy this summer. We were in Greenland. We were on an expedition. He came down with terrific pain in his leg. And he was trying to nurse his leg. And he reported, this was after we moved with a helicopter. We were throwing heavy things out of a roaring helicopter with the blade going just, right over your head. It's very nerve-wracking. He threw his back out, and he presented with these terrific spiraling pains. He thought he'd done something wrong with his leg. And there were 2 of us who were anatomists on that expedition. Both of us were sure, no, it's not your legs, your back, lie down. And sure enough, after about 5 days, he recovered. But this is very typical, this area with back involvement to get spiraling pain along the dermatome, referred pain. Back is relatively simple, the back side, with only L5, 4, and S1 represented at the bottom of the foot, S1, S2, and then a metameric count down to the anus. I go down right down to S5. So that's the introduction to the extremities, ladies and gentlemen. What I really do want you to think of as you go through them, sure, there's a lot of detail, but is this a flexor muscle group or an extensor muscle group? Is it a flexor nerve, extensor nerve? Once you get it sorted out on your own extremities, it's very easy, and then you can begin to understand function of hands and legs, which we will eventually get to. Let's take a break before we hear our former HST student introduce you to the art of imaging. You don't get docked in my mind. People have all kinds of stuff. I like to see what I can do on the run. How you doing, my man? Nice to see you. Good. Want to take you up, Tim? Dr. Slanik is not here yet. Well, thanks for that.
Check, 1, 2. Before you turn on.
Yeah, what it does, it lines up. You see, you've got
CD backup, although you don't have another computer, so my computer crashes.
and then the answers show up. So why not say, this is flexible, this is
Okay.
flexible.
All right. All right, we'll have to put this on here, I guess. When you're ready to turn.
I can just clip on.
We'll put that on there.
Oh, you slip it in. You can put it in the pocket, right in the pocket. It's fine too. Yeah.
Although these flexors were originally ventral. This is ventral. Primitive. That's ventral. Yeah. Yeah, that's a 3-axial leading edge, right? Yep. Ventral. Right. Okay, that's because I can't crank my leg around. It does. Way around. Well, to make it the leading edge, way around. That's a rotation about 2 axes. Yeah, right. This, it's not only this, but it's a, see, this surface surface extensor, it should be in my back. Same place as my back. It's not. It's aligned up here, flexor and ventral surface. So I'm way out. Yeah. Where's the it's my insert.
My own computer.
Just going through the motions, right?
Right. I got it. Why the heck is it there? I got to disarticulate your hip. Which I don't want to do.
But then your extensors are going to end up facing back.
That's right. They're going to be aligned over here.
You can do that, sure.
Just like my extensors. All right. See, what I'm telling you is my extensors are facing like my flexors are. So that's why this is called 180. And you have to understand that with diagram. So we'll start. I gave them, not knowing you were here, a quarter of.
Oh, that's okay.
You're short.
It's kind of like a little
Pointer?
laser pointer.
Yeah, they got one. I threw it during my lecture.
That's okay. Should work.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, yeah. Oh, just so I can point to normal anatomy.
Yeah.
It's over there.
Yeah, you haven't changed.
I know.
I have more questions.
It's not that fun humor, you know. You gotta,
It'll trouble you to shut it down. And,
oh, I can do that. Yeah, that's easy. That's why I'm here, like, so we can, like, kind of It's fine. Take your time. All right, I'll shut down.
if it doesn't come up this time,
Yeah.
then I'm going to ask you to go into control panels,
Okay.
go down to, I believe, what's this?
Yeah, no.
Display. And
Oh, we can check the displays. Yeah, we'll do that.
See, it might take it this time. Sometimes you reboot it and it just didn't recognize it right away.
Oh, you know,
You have to go-
computers. I should have used that chalk stuff. It would have worked. That's fine, whatever. So you're gonna, no, we can go in the display mode. Maybe it's not set quite right or something. It has to be set. It should be set. It should be set okay because I've given other talks on this computer and I think it's the default. Maybe it may not be. Right. No, I know.
It's only
I'm not seeing anything on the screen right now except for my screen.
there's some zoologists that are talking about a rostrum called the anterior posterior axis. They were upright. Right? There's posterior talk, right? As soon as I stand up, all of a sudden I go, this is anterior.
Can't change anything if that happens.
Is that on now, Frank? That's on now, right? Call Johnny. Yeah, we have report. We'll see if we can just bring it over and we can just take 2 minutes. set it to a lower resolution. Lower resolution. Maybe is it under the start button at all? Go under start and then see if that's may give you an option.
It worked.
We will be done at about 4:15, is that correct, Madam?
I sure hope so, and hopefully sooner.
Sooner than 4:15.
Hopefully sooner, for the sake of all of us.
Ladies and gentlemen. Like this is, I have the pleasure of welcoming back one of the brightest, vibrant, probably even wildest students that I've ever had in the program. Priscilla Slantz, now a radiologist and distinguished practitioner, went through our course the way I'd like all students to go through it. She just, I think, had fun every day, or at least appeared to be having fun every day. And let me see, that would have been in 1986, we took the course?
86, yeah.
86, we're still in the old Civil War second row.
That's right.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So
Back in the old days.
slabs, no air circulation.